starting a different summer series where we're focusing on particular songs that you have suggested and been given to us that could have some deeper meanings, some spiritual meanings. This is going to be weaved throughout the summer, but I invite you to be here next week as Alita Walburn's going to, the Woman Can Sing will bring some songs and a special ministry through song to us as we think about the songs of our lives, and she's going to participate in that. We will take a special offering for her ministry when we come next week, but invite someone to come with you because she's a powerful voice and a heart for the Lord, and I think you'll be blessed, and your neighbor or your friends or your loved one will be blessed too. So as we begin this series, The Songs of Our Lives, part of this has been inviting people to perhaps share a story of the meaning of a particular song, the song we're going to hear in just a minute. But let me give you some background, someone's story that was anonymously shared with me as this song was suggested. A few years ago, I had a serious suicide attempt and ended up on life support in the ICU. When I woke up from my coma, I realized that I was supposed to live and not die. I knew Jesus had a plan for my life, and that is why I was still alive. Even though I renewed my faith and I was working towards forgiveness, I still struggled quite a bit with the circumstances that had brought me into the hospital. A good friend came to visit me unexpectedly and introduced me to contemporary Christian music. The first song she shared with me was You Are More by 10th Avenue North. I started crying as it was the story of my life. Filled with shame and pain, I felt so alone and unlovable. This song assured me that even though I didn't know how to love myself, God still loved me through all my trials and tribulations. I was worthy of love and forgiveness. So many people cared about me and were willing to support me through this dark wilderness period of my life. This song, though I still struggle and I still have my moments, this song reminds me that I am not the person I once was before I accepted Christ. I am not defined by all the mistakes I have made. God loves me for me, just as I am. He has the ability to wash away the stains of my past and remake me into someone with hope, with meaning, with a future. I am more than I once was. I am His, and that is more than enough. I've been thinking a lot about gratitude this week. Been thinking a lot about gratitude. Every July 3rd or July 4th, NPR rebroadcasts every year they read the Declaration of Independence. Every year on July 3rd or July 4th, they did it July 3rd this week, and I enjoy that. I listen to that because it makes me kind of stop whatever planning and celebration and stuff I'm doing and think about this country and think about the gifts and to think about the ideas of the people who helped shape that document and ultimately the ideas in which our country is founded on. Now those people weren't perfect. Even as they were penning, God created that all men are created equal. Many of them owned slaves, but the ideas in which they penned, the ideas of democracy, of representative government, of the government serving at the consent of the people, of opportunity and equality and equality of opportunities, those are ideas that live beyond just a mortal person, aren't they? And I wonder, in the middle of our parties and plans and fireworks and celebrations, how many of us stop long enough to think about and give thanks for the gift of this country and the freedoms that we so often take for granted? Are we grateful? Are we grateful? I think about gratitude kind of like when I was a kid, and I've actually done this as an adult, so big kids do this too. Have you ever made one of those whirlpools in a swimming pool? Right? Where you get everybody moving in the same direction long enough that all of a sudden the pool has a current of its own, and it just kind of carries you along with it. And I think sometimes that can be like what our life is like, that we get carried along by our own thoughts, our own perspectives in the age of social media, or we can choose our own cable channels, or choose to listen to our own perspectives, and we get carried along by currents of thoughts, or maybe we even have our own negative thoughts that carry us along, and it's hard to break out of that current. And when you've got that current going in the pool, the whirlpool, how do you break out of it? You either climb out of the pool, or what else do you do? Turn around and go the other way. But if you do, what happens? Yeah, it starts to pull you with it. You go to the center of the pool, where there is less turbulence and more time to just stop. And I wonder if we do that in this country, to give thanks for the gifts, to experience and grow in gratitude. I think the same thing can often happen in our faith lives too. I mean, how often do we stop and give God thanks for the gift of grace? Do we stop, climb out of the flow of how busy our lives can be, how much we might live with a sense of privilege, or we earned this, to stop long enough to thank God for what God has done for us. When God says to you and me, He says, hey, I know what you've done. I know where you've been. I know you've made mistakes. But you are not the mistakes you've made. You are not the mistakes you've created. You are more than the problems you create. You are redeemed by my love for you. That is who you are. Do we stop the whirlpool of life long enough to reflect on that gift too? That's part of what I hear this song talking about. It's what I hear Paul writing about in Romans chapter 1, this grace, God's grace, God's unconditional acceptance of who we are. Can we believe that? How many of you have had this experience? It's Christmas time and you're going Christmas shopping and you're with a family member or a friend and you're going to buy a gift for someone, and your friend or loved one or someone says, why are you buying a gift for them? They haven't acted or related to you in any way this year that would show that they cared about anything you give to them. And your response is, I'm called to imitate Christ. And even though they may seem unworthy to me, God calls me to call them worthy and to give them a gift. Not because I think they're worthy, but because God has already claimed them as worthy. That's grace. God's acceptance, even when we think there is something about us that could not be acceptable to God. And I don't think we get grace. Now, getting is a couple of ways we can get that. You get grace. I mean, you don't get grace because we earn it. We don't get grace because we deserve it. We get grace because God extends it to us first. Somehow, some way, God counts us as worthy and offers us grace. But we don't get it, I don't believe, fully without gratitude. Walter Brueggemann is an Old Testament scholar, and he talks about the root word and the Hebrew word for salvation. There's an actual root meaning for that, and the root meaning of the word that makes up salvation in the Hebrew language is actually translated as to broaden, or to expand, or to enlarge, or to create a bigger opportunity for. And one of the things he says is that's what salvation is about. It's about opening our hearts to something bigger and greater and deeper. It's broadening our heart, broadening our minds, broadening our perspectives. And isn't that what gratitude is? Opening yourself up. There are two steps, I think, to gratitude. The first is that honesty that must come with gratitude, that I've made mistakes, that we don't do things perfectly, that I've created problems, that I'm human and I'm broken and I'm imperfect. And then that other part of gratitude, that awareness. And even though that's all true, my gosh, I woke up today. My gosh, I had breakfast today. My 2 feet hit the floor this morning. Life kept coming. Even though there were things I may have done which I would count me as imperfect and unworthy, God had a way of continuing to breathe and call me to life. It's like that parable of the seed we discussed 2 weeks ago. The farmer puts a seed in the ground day and night, day and night. He doesn't know, but it just keeps growing. That is grace. God moved in your life and mine with blessing, even in the trial, even in the suffering, and even in the difficulty. Isn't that what I think Paul is kind of saying in that text from Romans? Even though that life stinks sometimes, even though that life has its very difficult moments, even though we be honest and say, it's not all peaches and cream, it says there is this movement of God. There is this God taking the worst in us, the worst about us, taking our scars and turning them into stars. And Paul wrote it this way. He said, we also boast of our troubles because we know that trouble produces endurance. Endurance brings God's approval, and His approval creates hope. And this hope does not disappoint us, for God has poured out His love into our hearts by means of the Holy Spirit, who is God's gift to us. It is difficult, he says, for someone to die for a righteous person. It may even be that someone might dare die for a good person, but God has shown us how much He loves us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It's the power of grace, I can't wrap my mind around grace very well. I can understand 2 + 2 is 4 and 5 + 5 is 10, but I can't always wrap my mind around how radical God's love is. That God knows the stuff I've done, and I won't tell you, but I've done some stuff I'm not happy about, and I bet you've got a few things too that you probably wouldn't want to tell me, but God knows. And yet, when Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do, we were all written in that. That was grace for us. And it really gets to us when we move towards gratitude for the gift. When we move towards allowing that grace to really sink in and realize how special it is. And that no matter what problems we create, no matter what mistakes we make, that is not who we are. In God's love, we are more. We are more than those. So as you think about communion today, as you think about the whole notion of gratitude, as you think about what it means for you and I to come before God and to think about things, I want to share with you something I read this week about a religious talk show that I heard about this week, where the hostess was interviewing a young woman who had just recently come to know Christ and had been received into a community of faith. And until her recent conversion, she lived on the wrong side of the tracks. She lived in the fast lane, and she teetered on the brink of destruction. So overwhelming was the sense of forgiveness that this young woman at this show practically gushed with joy as she said, I can't express the sense of gratitude that I feel that God has changed my life. And the talk show hostess knew where she was coming from, because she too had walked on the wild side in her life before experiencing God's personal love and forgiveness. She said, I know what you mean. Every day I thank God for saving me. Literally, she said. And then she added a very profound statement. She said, you know what I've noticed though? People who have always been in the church, people who always do what they ought, who never really have gotten into trouble, have always been prim and proper, don't have the same sense of gratitude that I do. In fact, I've noticed that for most church people, it's not so much what God has done for them, but what they still want God to do. And I found myself reading that, asking this question, which of these people do I identify with the most? Am I the person forgiven on the wild side? Yeah. But I grew up in the church. So I had to be honest and say, you know what? I wonder if I'm more like the people she's talking about. That I think grace is more of a privilege, or I've earned it, or it's cheap, rather than something I ought to really think deeply about and be grateful for. To be honest about my humanness and to be aware of God's unending grace and forgiveness and claiming of your life and mine. So as you come to the altar, and we'll come for communion, and we'll share it by intention, and the altar rail will be there for you to pray. Maybe that's what you want to be thinking about, being grateful in. And where do you see yourself? Are you the one that's always been in the church and wonders if you really know what, take time to appreciate and have gratitude for the gift? Or do you feel today like one of those women on the outside? I don't believe God could love me. And the truth is, God already has. And invites you into a changed life. All God's people said.